Yo, welcome back to One More Mana. My name is Derek, and today we are getting into another deck tech. Finally, it has been a minute. Any patrons out there waiting on deck doctors, those are also in the queue coming up soon. Those just take a little extra love and attention, so it's been taking a little bit longer. But for this deck tech, it is a deck that I've been playing for a couple months that I can't stop playing it. It's become one of my go-tos, and it is for Flamewar Brash Veteran. But if you're wanting any of the cards in this deck, or you're just trying to spice up your decks, head on over to TCG Player. Best thing about TCG Players, you can go ahead and search for your local game stores on there, help support them in the process. And if you use the link down in the description below, you can help support us as well. You know, we always appreciate all the love. And speaking of supporting the channel, gotta rock your Into the AM. Use the discount code on screen. You can go ahead and support us through that as well while you look good. And I know you don't care about hearing from me about looking good. That's why we got Kenneth the Heathen there. And I got a little special surprise. Normally we have a little pre-recorded message of him popping up on screen and talking to y'all in his proper voice and being all fancy with his beard and being a wizard and all that. But like, we got something better now. You might not see a ton of Ken in the coming weeks as he is exploring the multiverse and going on a number of vacations, but we are going to have phone-in correspondences from Ken himself. So Ken, tell the people why they should rock Into the AM.
Hello, it is Kenneth the Heathen. Beep boop, bop, boop, beep. I'm speaking Phyrexian, as you can see. Rock Into the AM, and maybe you too can learn a new language. Beep boop, bop.
The man's a poet. The man is a poet. All right, yeah. Use the code on screen. Show us some love. And remember what he said, something about dripping in space and screaming. All right, now let's get into this deck tech. But before we do, I'm going to put this time code on screen over in one of these spots. You'll see it. If you just want the deck tech, jump there. Mini rant is going to come first to kind of talk about product fatigue and really my journey to building this deck in the first place. Anyone who's still here and sticking around, thank you for being here for my rantings and ravings. I appreciate it, and so does my cat and my girlfriend. They're so tired of hearing about this. One of the things that's been most of a hot topic for years at this point is product fatigue. It feels like at any given point there are so many sets being released, so many new commanders, that it can be genuinely exhausting, and it can be really honestly pretty mentally taxing. If you're somebody who has that relationship with Magic where you're constantly trying to keep up, it's very hard to do. I know me personally, for the longest time, I'm always somebody I don't have a ton of decks. I keep maybe around 5 decks at a time, and I put all of my everything into these decks. I get all the fancy versions of cards, and I'm always trying to retool and find new interesting things to do in specifically these decks. And for the longest time, I got so excited when a new version of a card would come out, a new foil, something. To me, that was always incredibly exciting. And it got to the point where there were so many products being released with so many premium versions and so many different printings that I was just getting exhausted. I couldn't keep up with the newest and the greatest thing to upgrade my decks for. Every time a set was coming out, I felt myself getting stressed. And that was just talking about upgrading my existing decks. When it came to looking at new commanders, I almost lost interest because it felt like it was a whole like job to try to keep up and read all these commanders, find which ones I'd be interesting. Do I want to build this? Am I going to still be using it? And by the time I even came to a decision, a new set was being previewed, and I just couldn't keep up. And it was honestly hurting my relationship with the game for a while. And something I found, and the kind of my wake-up call was the Brothers War. And this kind of now transitions into this deck tech. The Brothers War was, I think, the single set I was most hyped for from the time it was announced. This is my favorite storyline in Magic. Y'all know I love Phyrexians. I was so interested in the whole Mishra Urza timeline and all of the things that happened. And the fact that we were going to get that in a modern day set and get all these characters, I was so excited. The second that got announced, I could not stop talking about it. And then it got here and I was stressed. I genuinely felt like I couldn't keep up. It felt like every time I wanted to just enjoy the flavor and the art and the characters, it felt like I was just missing out on something. Is this going to break this? Is this going to be a new staple? Do I need to buy these now? What's the price? Like, it really started building. And that was kind of a wake up call for me that made me realize like I need to engage in a healthier way for me. So obviously I still keep up we do set reviews and talk about our favorite new cards and sets and all that. But I've really, outside of engaging for the channel, taken a step back. So when a set releases, it's cool, but I don't need to know every card. I'm not interested in even picking up cards from a set, usually until a few months out at this point, and once everything settles and I can decide where I want to put things. And I started doing that with sets, where I would revisit sets 6 months, 9 months, a year later. And when I did that with the Brothers War, and a couple months ago, I just sat down and just appreciated how awesome the set was, pulling myself away from the hype and the constant roll of just the hype train in the previews, and really just took in that we got a set with Ursula and Mishra and all the characters in this giant battle. And on top of that, for a battle between these two iconic characters with robots, and we got Transformers in the mix. Like, you would have told my 7-year-old self that, I would have lost my mind. I wish they had Transformers magic cards when I was a little kid, because then I would have invested more in magic instead of other things and probably pay for college. I don't know. But either way, it made me appreciate it. It was awesome. And I realized the way I was engaging wasn't letting me appreciate it. So I've been finding myself doing that more and more, randomly just going back to a set months and months to a year after it's been done and being like, this is awesome. I don't remember any of these cards. I could barely keep track of what it was, but now I'm getting to go through and enjoy it at my own pace. And that's where Flamewar comes in, because I just re-engaged and for 2 weeks just basically had my own little preview season for Brothers War a year after its release. I just took it all in. And that's where I discovered Flamewar and realized this is a commander I've needed in my life. It's the same way I discovered Slogurk and fell in love with Slogurk, was doing the same thing with the Innistrad sets and really just rediscovering them at my own pace. So now, look at the time code, rant over, finally back into the deck tech. So anybody that's just jumping ahead, I can't say I blame you, but now we're going to talk about how awesome of a commander Flamewar is. If you're not familiar with the Transformers commanders, they essentially have this ability where when conditions are met for each side, you convert back and forth. It creates really dynamic gameplay and honestly keeps things fresh, because each side has a little bit of its own thing going on. And playing it out, it almost feels like a fair version of partner commanders, where you don't have the extra card in hand, you're not kind of dodging commander attacks as much. I've really fallen in love with the playstyle of the Transformers. So I do think if you've been interested in one, definitely try it out. It's very, very fresh and new. So with Flamewar, 1 black and a red for a 3/2, and she is amazing. We'll get to the more than meets the eye cost in just a second. But the first ability is you can sacrifice an artifact to put a +1/+1 counter on Flamewar and convert it. You can only do this as a sorcery, which is really important. You can't dodge removal by flipping, or you can't sack things at instant speed. It is at sorcery speed, which really keeps certain things in check with the deck, which I really appreciate for that. Second ability is you can pay 1 mana, discard your hand, and put all exile cards with intel counters into your hand. You might be asking, what are intel counters? That's where we get to the other side of Flamewar. Flamewar Streetwise Operative. And this is the place, or the part where you can cast for the more than meets the eye cost for a black and the red, which we're going to be doing a lot, and I'll get into that in just a second. This is Living Metal, which means that essentially Living Metal on your turn, this is an artifact creature. You can attack with it, do everything, but on other players' turns, it is not a creature. This creates a lot of interesting gameplay decisions, which again, we'll get into a second. It is Menace and Death Touch, and is a 2/1, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, exile that many cards from the top of your library face down with intel counters. That's a lot. I basically just read a whole novel to y'all, and you might be thinking, Derek, you talk a lot of stuff about cards that are novels. Why do you like this one? I don't have a good answer. I just do. I'm probably being somewhat hypocritical in that. This is essentially, I feel like I just read a book. Essentially how this playstyle is you're going to play this on turn 2 every time for the more than meets the eye cost. You now have a 2/1 Menace and Death Touch. You want to be coming in turn 3. Very easy to get in. It's very hard to block a Menace Death Toucher. You're right away, bam, exiling 2 cards, and then after it deals that combat damage, you're going to convert it. This is where things get interesting. One thing to note, I have a lot of equipment in this deck with Living Metal. If you leave it on that motorcycle side, so let's say you deal damage, convert, try to convert back, all your equipment are falling off. So you need to be careful with that, where if you leave it as a motorcycle on other people's turns, all of a sudden it's not a creature anymore and you start really being inefficient. So, but if you do need to dodge removal, you're worried about a creature-based board wipe, you can leave it as that motorcycle. So basically, you bring it in, deals damage, you convert it back to the robot side, and then you're going to have to go ahead, sacrifice an artifact, put a +1 counter on it to convert it, and then you get this cycle. Once you get enough cards in exile on the robot side, you can pay the 1 mana, discard your hand, get all those cards with intel counters. This deck will get a lot of cards in your hand. There's some awesome discard synergies, but you're never worried about. This is the type of deck where I don't care how many cards you have in hand, you feel fine at any point discarding your hand for some of the benefits we get, in order to just go ahead and refill it because of how much we're swinging in. So love that. It really opens up a lot of cool gameplay decisions. The key things to know about this deck: 1, you're going to need a lot of artifact sack fodder. You don't want to attack with this, not on the motorcycle side, because that is the only way to get those intel counters and the only way to refill your hand. You want to be dumping your hand and then refilling it. Swinging with the robot side is basically a waste. You don't get any extra benefit outside of just dealing damage, and that's not fun. And few other points to point out before we move on to the categories. One, both sides do count. It's the same card. Both sides are still your commander. So regardless of which side deals damage, you're still dealing commander damage. That's something important to account for. And because it's converting, those +1 counters and equipment stay on. So when you're converting back and forth, your equipment don't fall off. Your +1 counters don't fall off. It's not leaving the battlefield. It's just flipping over. And that's something. So really the only thing you have to worry about with equipment falling off is if you leave it on that motorcycle side on an opponent's turn. So now that I've read that novel to you on how to figure out what this card does, we're going to get into this deck and why it's so awesome. This is very much just an artifact sacking Voltron deck. We're trying to get a giant motorcycle, put a bunch of swords and equipment, and punch your friends. And in the process, draw so many cards. I actually did lose. I decked myself successfully playing this deck exclusively with the commander's ability and some of Ken's mill shenanigans. It is a wonderful time. One last note. Getting into these categories, I'm going to focus exclusively on the more budget and interesting cards in this deck. This is my personal list. There's going to be a lot of expensive cards, non-budget cards. Y'all don't want to hear me talk about a dock side. Like, we all know that's good. It's a waste of y'all's time. I want to talk about the more unique and budget cards that when you're building this deck, if you do, easy to pick up and fun to throw in. So first category, super quick and easy. We're going to get into the Planeswalkers, or the Planeswalker, and it's Daretti. Daretti's everything we want. We love its minus ability. We want to be able to recycle artifacts. One thing with our commander is it is an artifact. This is the type of deck where it's very mana hungry. You're going to see me playing fast mana, which is something I normally don't do because of the fact that we're constantly re-equipping equipment. This is very much a Voltron deck, and we don't have the benefits of like white to get around any sort of equipping costs. So instead of having to recast our commander and pay for commander tax, we want abilities like this where we either can cheat a big equipment into play or bring our commander back. Moving on to the creatures, we have some of the coolest cards in this deck, and I absolutely love them. It's a few main categories of stuff we really need. First category is we want our artifact sack fodder. One of the biggest things is every turn we need to sacrifice an artifact to convert back to a motorcycle, and we don't want to be sacrificing our equipment or important creatures or lands or anything like that. So Loyal Apprentice does everything we need, where every turn we're getting that fodder. In this deck, treasures function much more for sack fodder than really any sort of ramp or mana usage. So stuff like Grim Hireling and Professional Facebreaker are wonderful just for the fact that we're always trying to connect, and then we get that sack fodder to go ahead and convert every turn. Those are wonderful cards in any deck, but I really, really just love what they do in here, and that's what we're interested in any sort of treasure or artifact producers for. So we have that sack fodder. We only can do it at sorcery speed, so we need to be able to create those on our turn. Another big thing about this deck is discarding cards. You're regularly going to be discarding your hand, and when I first was building this, I was like, oh, you're just going to play all your cards out, draw a bunch, play them all out. It's just not how it works. Usually there's points in it. This deck does not run the most removal, so you're just fishing for things sometimes. You will regularly be discarding 3, 4, 5, 6 cards. So stuff like Surly Badgesaur is just so good. You get treasures, which we need to sacrifice. You buff this thing up, you start fighting creatures. This is just a removal machine and something that really makes this deck hum. On a similar lines, Archfiend of Ifnir is broken, just completely broken. This thing will regularly just keep the board clear and let you attack. It's a bit oppressive if you're in very creature heavy metas. So this is something to test out, because honestly, your playgroup might not be a fan of this with how often it will just be a one-sided board wipe or leave your opponents with just the tiniest meaningless creatures. Those are really the biggest things. We're going to circle back to some other stuff in the game winning step. Don't worry about Ragavan, Dockside. Those are really not clutch. I had those, I didn't have a deck for them, wanted to put them in here. Those function the same way as just anything that enters creates an artifact token, just as good in this deck, and that's the only reason. That's really why we care about them being in here. Obviously, I got to point out Mishra and Phyrexian Dragon Engine. There are a lot of flip cards and meld cards in this deck. I wanted to put a sub-theme of the Brothers War in here. It's my favorite meld combination. We draw so many cards. We don't tutor for it, but there's a really good chance that we can draw into it and just have some melding fun. Moving on to the sorceries. The sorceries are more just regular stapley things. These are the type of things that we're going to have your board wipes, your targeted removal, some card draw. So the things that really make this deck unique and fun are going to be more things like Unearth, because again, we want to find ways and efficient ways to cheat commander tax. Unearth is a great way. We can cycle it away if we don't need it, or we can use it, bring our commander back, and not have to worry about paying that commander tax, and that is huge. Seize the Day is such a fun card in this deck. You can go very much into extra combats if you want to make this deck more powerful and just draw all the cards. I only run Seize the Day mainly because of the flashback, so if it ends up in the graveyard, you can just go ahead and cash it. I love the ability to have cards that even if I discard them, I still get value off of it. And then obviously Scrap Mastery. I love a deck that can play Scrap Mastery. Living Death and Scrap Mastery are two of my favorite cards ever. This deck is perfect for like 35 artifacts. And the best thing, again, even if we're not getting full value, it's another way to get your commander back with maybe some of the equipment. So that way, if someone Vandal Blasts you or anything like that, you do have a means to come back. Moving on to the instance, there's only 5 instance, very limited instant speed interactions. So many of my decks have become just basically all instant speed interactions. So this is kind of out of my comfort zone where we're much more doing our thing and we're interacting when necessary. So don't really worry about the specific ones. I love an Abrade, Chaos Warp, some of the staples. I have some of the more expensive free interaction spells, not necessary to the deck. I think anything that's 1 or 2 mana, some of those red, destroy an artifact, destroy a creature, those types of things are going to do you just fine. Malakir Rebirth is very good. I would recommend that if you can get that in there, just because, again, it's protection for your commander, and we have so many things in here to make sure we're not getting taxed out, because if our commander's gone forever, we're in a really bad spot. With the artifacts, there's really just 2 categories. We got our equipment and then our mana rocks. What I will say is, in this, my deck list, my personal one, I have like a Grim Monolith, a Mana Crypt, a Mana Vault, all of these things, a Mox, something, Opal. Those are not important. Don't worry about those. The thing is, no matter what we have, we're always casting our commander on turn 2 and swinging on turn 3. So we're not really interested in racing. I honestly use a lot of these fast mana rocks as like ritual effects. So early game, I can play a Grim Monolith, tap into a sword, and then sack that monolith to my commander to convert it back. So if you get any like 0-drop artifact, you can run Mishra's Baubles and things like that and still get a good amount of the reason why we have those cards, or obviously you just proxy them because they're expensive and we don't need to spend that much. So whatever direction you want to go in, getting cheap or 0 or 1-drop artifacts of really any kind will fulfill the role that a Mana Crypt or a Grim Monolith plays in this deck, because so often I care more about having a minimal mana investment or a positive mana investment to sacrifice than I do the actual racing out ahead. This is not, no pun intended with the motorcycle, this is not a deck where we're going to fast mana, kill everyone turn 5. It's going to be turn 6, 7 before you're realistically going to be trying to kill someone. Now with the equipment, this is the most versatile part and really the most flexible part of this. And it's something, one of my favorite parts about this deck. This deck is going to be as strong as the equipment you put in there. If you want to go big splashy stuff, I got Cauldron Complete and Elbrus the Binding Blade and all of my favorite swords and Batterskull. You're going to have a big, stompy, fun time. It's going to be powerful. It's going to hit hard, but it's going to take you a minute to get there. If you want to try to just min-max and find the right equipment to just bam, 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 get 5 equipment by like turn 5 and try to one-shot, you can also do that. Maybe giving, I don't know, like double strike and all these other things. I just threw all my favorite equipment in Magic and I wanted to put it on a motorcycle, and that's all this deck was about. And maybe I want to flip an Elbrus into a big demon. That's all I care about. But very much you can control the power level based on the equipment, because through and through this is a Voltron deck, and that's basically always how we're trying to win. Obviously there's ways to change that and make it be able to one-shot the table and do more things. I'm not interested in that. I want to swing at one person at a time, put equipment on, and just punch my friends, because that's what I like to do. Another really important category of these artifacts are going to be artifacts that replace themselves or that basically create more sack fodder for you. So you have stuff like Prize Statue, Nimblewright Schematic, Oni-Call Anvil. All of these do a great job of, you can sacrifice them or the tokens they create, and it makes you and allows you to sacrifice those artifacts to go ahead and get this motorcycle side out every turn without setting your game plan back. Because sacrificing an artifact at least once a turn doesn't sound like much until you got to do it, and then you're realizing that it's more than it sounds like. The enchantments are very light. Really the most important one to me is Guild Artisan, because again, it creates those artifact tokens. Underworld Breach is very powerful in any deck, but we're going to be discarding so many cards that having access to your graveyard is great. So not just trying to, like, you know, go min-max super powerful. Underworld Breach is the best, but in this specific deck, because our graveyard will be massive, it's just awesome to have there. And in the lands, really the most important thing in the lands, run as many artifact lands as possible, both for artifact synergies and to sacrifice worst case scenario. So we have the regular, you know, red-black artifact lands. I'll put them on the screen. Whether it's something like a Vault of Whispers, I love Treasure Vault because that's an artifact land. Those are really the most important things. I will say this is a deck that I've found in Commander. I find Urza Saga to be a fairly fair card for the most part. This is one deck where your little Urza constructs are the wow. Regularly, those things are like 2020s. I win more games, I feel like, swinging with a giant construct with some equipment than my actual commander. So if you have a spare Urza Saga, because sure people have those, this is actually a really fun deck to run it in, where you don't really care about the tutoring as much. Whatever, you're gonna get in a couple constructs, have them just big as possible and ready to swing out. And I love big stompy constructs, so it's a good time. That's gonna wrap it up for all the categories. Now let's get into the best part of every deck tech, and the most, really the robotiest, the bikiest, and the transformiest. It's the game-winning step. How are we about to win the game with this deck? Whew, it's a good time. We're just swinging. We are putting every equipment in sight onto a motorcycle and running our friends over. It's just a good time. There's really not an alternate win con. I mean, you might be able to flip Elbrus into a demon and put equipment on it. Maybe you make a construct and put equipment on it. But the only ways you're trying to win, maybe you meld a Mishra and put equipment on it. All we care about is putting our favorite equipment onto creatures. And some of the other equipment-based decks I've played in the past have been very powerful, not having many ways, if any, to cheat equip costs outside of like a Hammer of Nazan, or maybe one or two ways, makes the deck feel a lot more fair. Targeted removal can really slow us down and make us have to rebuild everything. And honestly, that obstacle is what makes the deck so much more fun. That's going to do it for this week's deck tech, though. Really hope y'all enjoyed it. Super fun deck. I really hope you all get to see it on stream a little bit, and if you look at the deck list, hopefully have your own version as well. Let me know down in the comments below. Have you tried any Transformers commanders, and how's your experience been? So much to come, so many exciting things to come, but until then, I will see y'all next time.